60 people here going round trying to subvert their own government's willingness to get everybody on board, even for the rather pathetic proposals which the United States has brought forward. Exxon, that's...
Decades ago, some of America's largest companies joined forces to cast doubt about climate change, knowing that they would profit more if we did nothing. The Texas Permian Basin is ground zero in the war over whether the future of American energy lies in oil and gas or renewables. Stretching for hundreds of miles, the Permian Basin accounts for nearly half of all U.S. oil production. If things go as planned, only Saudi Arabia will produce more by 2029. But as the world moves to phase out fossil fuels, that industry, with its powerful lobby, is under siege. And it seems willing to try just about anything to stay in business. Back in the 1980s, the natural gas industry's enemy was electricity. And it battled for America's hearts and minds and kitchen appliances.
That's what I was taught.
4 decades later, the natural gas industry is still at it.
We're cooking with gas.
And one way the gas industry has been doing this is by hiring social media influencers. My reporting found that these influencers were all talking about the virtues of cooking with gas, and it tied back to this broader industry campaign to try to prevent cities from pursuing these electrification campaigns. So this was a very 21st century kind of misinformation campaign on how the gas industry was using social media in a more sophisticated way to fight climate action.
For decades, the oil and gas industry has known that clean energy would be essential to preventing a global catastrophe, but also bad for profits.
How dare you!
So in the classic strategy, if you can't beat them, join them, the fossil fuel industry began advertising that they are part of the solution.
At Chevron, we believe the future of energy is lower carbon.
We see a flood of advertising where the oil industry is showing itself as the greenest thing that can be. We're paying attention to emissions. We know this is serious. We're very, very smart, by the way, and we're figuring it out. So back off, everybody. Exxon ran multi-million-dollar ads from 2016 through just before the pandemic hit about their algae program.
Some farms grow food. This one grows fuel.
Which is a side project for them, way less funding than their multi-billion-dollar exploration for new oil for us to burn.
That could one day power planes, propel ships, and fuel trucks.
It gave the impression that you might be putting algae-derived biofuel in your gas tank really soon, when in fact, it's not soon at all.
Or even at all. Despite those biofuel ads, a decade earlier, the company concluded that it would never replace oil.
We looked at everything. I mean, we looked from soup to nuts. That none of these technologies were going to be competitive against oil.
Lee Raymond was the CEO of Exxon for decades. I mean, he was like a character, he was like Jabba the Hutt or something, like a character out of a weird sci-fi movie. Totally stubborn on climate change, unmovable, and also, we think, the architect of their backlash campaign, their denial campaign, at least authorizing it in the mid-90s through when he left.
Did we aggressively fight against some of the science? Yes. Did we join some of these shadow groups to work against some of the early efforts? Yes, that's true. But there's nothing illegal about that.
Companies like Exxon spend hundreds of millions to delay action on climate change to maximize their profits, knowing full well the deadly consequences for the rest of us.
We lost a generation, to be honest. I mean, we could have taken action on this in the 80s. We certainly had enough knowledge and enough warning and enough certainty to take action in the early 90s to start cutting emissions. In fact, Exxon's own documents say if society is going to take this seriously, they ought to start cutting emissions in the 90s. Through the 90s, through the 2000s, really into the Obama era, we've done nothing. We've done very little. And in the meantime, emissions go up, the concentration in the atmosphere goes up, the warming is going up, and it's like a runaway train.